Welcome to the High Performance Health Summit. We are here to give you some amazing strategies to help you become superhuman, to increase your energy, to upgrade your body, and also your productivity. I'm here with New York Times bestselling author, Ben Greenfield. Congratulations, Ben, on the New York Times bestselling book that you just came out with. He's also voted by the National Strength and Conditioning Association as America's top fitness expert. He's also a coach, a nutritionist, a speaker, and also a triathlete. And what I love about what you're doing, Ben, is you work with a lot of high-performing individuals, CEOs, entrepreneurs, etc. And today's topic is really at the core of high performance. It's about leading a limitless lifestyle, hacking your brain into high performance. Let's begin.
Sweet. Well,
Awesome.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Dr. Jones. And lest anyone think that I take myself too seriously, and since this is a video Skype interview, I am in my underwear right now. So let's set the stage with that. Although I decided to clothe myself from the waist up.
I love
It's 12:30 and I haven't gotten dressed yet, but I guarantee I can still give you some decent advice. I hope.
This is a high performance strategy that we're going to be talking about.
That's right.
Exactly.
High performers stay in their underwear until noon.
Yeah, exactly. And how's everything going with the book Beyond Training, Mastering Endurance, Health, and Life? You're getting some great feedback from it?
Yeah. Apparently people are using it for more than just a heavy paperweight, which is what I was afraid of,
Yep.
that are a giant weapon. So, yeah, it's people are reading it amazingly. And so it's 500 pages of solid physiology and every hack, tip, trick, and tactic you need to enhance your physical and mental performance, or simply something that you could use to fall asleep a little more quickly at night, if you want some dry scientific reading. No, I'm just kidding. I put lots of practical stuff in there. I try not to get too nerdy, even though there are a few pages.
That's great. That's fantastic. Well, I know a lot of high-performing individuals deal with the decrease in brain function over time. They may burn out. They push themselves hard. Brain fog is a word that I hear a lot. Hormone dysregulation is something I see all the time on lab tests that come back. Micronutrient deficiencies, all these things that are essential for optimal brain function and energy levels. And so, what would you say the biggest problems are in society with high-performing individuals that you see with the people that you've worked with? Let's start with the problem. Maybe we'll hash out and hack out the solutions as we go.
Sure. People fade, right?
Yeah.
Like we start as high performers and we're like a flash in the pan.
Yeah.
You'll see people get 2, 3, 10 years out of life and then they're done. They're washed up. They're overweight. Kids hate them because they never saw them, or they're divorced, or just like all these problems happen because it's so easy to fashion your life after the quote unquote sleepless elite who drive a hard train, and claim to sleep 3 or 4 or 5 hours a night.
Exactly.
And wind up ultimately fat, unhappy, and with lots of neurotransmitter deficiencies. And you can look at snapshots of people who started off young and vibrant and ready to rumble. You'll take like a Mark Zuckerberg, for example. My apologies if Mark is watching this. And then you look at them, and the amount of accelerated aging that appears to have occurred is through the friggin' roof because of everything from the sleep deprivation to the stress to the inflammation from the combination of travel, electromagnetic pollution, high amounts of snacking, low amounts of like real ancestral food, gut issues, and a lack of neurotransmitter formation in the gut due to the big bomb that cortisol, high stress, and lack of sleep can put on the gut. We put all this together, and it creates this perfect storm for accelerated aging and a real loss of mental function. So you'll like fire on all cylinders and get a bunch of really cool stuff done in life for maybe 5 years, maybe a decade, and then you're just done. And so for example, I sleep 8 or 9 hours a night. I really de-stress. I take a nap for like a half hour to an hour every afternoon. I settle for the fact that maybe, yeah, over the course of 5 years, I might get a little bit less done, a little bit less accomplished than some of my peers.
Yeah.
But dude, I'm freaking in this for the long haul.
Yeah.
And I do get a lot of comments from people who say that I look the same way I did when I was 25, when I was 20. Some people who I would rather punch in the face when I was 15. Got
Exactly.
bigger muscles than I did when I was 15. Come on. But, ultimately, we should be able to go and stay really cognitively enhanced till we're 70, 80, 90 years old.
Exactly.
And I think that some people just go for this biological free pass, this modafinil-induced, sleep-deprived mania
Right.
of trying to make that buck as quickly as possible. And I think there's a better way to do things, a more
Absolutely.
patient, happy way to do things.
Yeah.
And if I may say, and then I'll shut up and get off my soapbox.
Yeah,
that's why I
good.
love this whole concept of like mini retirements, right? You
Right.
don't work your butt off until you're just done, right? At 60 years old.
Yeah.
And you've got a knee replacement, and you want to go travel the world, but half of your body isn't even working, or you've got diabetes, or you can't sleep, or you don't have libido. So even if you take your wife to an island, you can't have hot, crazy sex with her. I mean, all this stuff that adds up.
Right.
When in reality, I'm a big fan of living life a little bit more slowly.
Yeah.
Right, taking care of your body, taking care of your brain.
Yep.
Doing little mini retirements along the way, so that you're enjoying life, taking a break, stepping back. And, case in point, like this weekend, I could stay home, I could make money, I could deprive myself of sleep, I could work, I could do consults, and I could just kill it in business.
Yeah.
And instead, I'm venturing off into the forest for 48 hours where I won't have a cell phone signal, I won't have a computer, I won't have anything, and I'm going to basically be, climbing waterfalls and hiking up in the mountains with some of my friends.
That's fantastic.
And, that is how you take care of your brain and take care of your body. And ultimately, that's how you become more successful in life from a physical and mental standpoint.
Yeah.
I know that sounds a little woo-woo. I know we're going to delve into the things that you can do while you're sitting in your office, but big picture perspective, that's the way you got to be thinking.
Right. Yeah. Well, eventually, you've got to learn and think about what you can do to disengage and to rejuvenate your emotions in a way. So your inner soul, your inner being. And another person that we're going to be interviewing in the summit is Stephen Kotler. I know you just interviewed him, and one of the things that he talks about in his book, which we'll get into in this call as well, is that high performers, when you see a lot of like executives, a lot of high performing individuals, they do what you do. They're going out and they're climbing and they're hiking and they're hanging out like in exotic locations, etc. So it's important to kind of build your life around this kind of semi-retirement lifestyle, which would be ideal. But I know a lot of people on the call, they're in an office, they don't have the luxury perhaps to be able to get as much downtime as they would like, and we're going to get into some real practical things that you can implement to transform your health for life. So let's talk about, Ben, the kind of greatest strategies you've implemented around maximizing brain function and increasing the health of our neurotransmitter profiling and things that will help to increase our energy and our body. And just before I get into that, I'll just say that the brain, it controls every single cell, tissue, and organ in your body. If you cut a nerve going to your heart stops, right? So it's like this is an extremely important organ, and that's why it's so important to understand how to optimize and maximize its function. So I'm excited about this.
Yeah, and if I could say, and this is something that a lot of more ancient cultures believed, is that this is where your brain was, that your heart was the control center. So there's some teachings and some science that would disagree with what you just said in a way, and say that the heart regulates the brain and not vice versa. And maybe if we get into time, we can talk about heart-brain electrical signaling and how to take care of the health of your vagus nerve and how to kind of track some of that. Yeah. But I would say when we're talking about our biggest wins from a mental performance standpoint, and if we're going to simplify this and maybe use 3 buckets that people could put things into, I would say that bucket number 1 would be to shut down inflammation.
Yeah.
While at the same time engaging in some really potent anti-inflammatory techniques.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 2 would be to fix any neurotransmitter deficiencies,
Yeah.
whether those neurotransmitter deficiencies are arising from your internal bacteria or whether they are arising from actual nutrients that could be present to enhance your neurotransmitter function. And then I would say number 3 would be address what's basically called your HPA axis, which is the connection between your hypothalamus, your pituitary gland, and your adrenal glands. Okay, so if we can address those 3 variables, you're really going to feel a huge difference in terms of kind of getting that effect of taking the limitless pill, right, without taking that biological free pass of using something like the limitless pill, which does exist, by the way. It's called modafinil. There are other forms of it like aniracetam, piracetam, alpha GPC. I've used that stuff before. It puts you on, like, think about like those fairy tales where you put somebody on fast forward and it just like allows them to skip over certain parts of their life or accomplish a bunch, and then they're just like aged. Like you age 2 years in 2 days. Like that's the way that you feel. For anybody watching who has tried smart drugs or used that stuff, like you accomplish a whole bunch over the course of a day or 2, and then you just crash and you fall asleep for like 8 or 10 or 12 hours. It's just like that can't be healthy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
but there's a way to do it naturally.
Stuff is few and far between. There are ways that you can enhance and upregulate brain function naturally, but you get to a certain point where the brain simply wasn't meant to be on fast forward, right? So you just got to be careful. So let's delve into bucket number 1. Let's take a dive into that one.
Let's do
inflammation
that, for sure.
So the way that you need to understand this is that you have certain cells in your neural tissue called glial cells. And if these cells become activated by inflammatory signals, in this case something like cytokines, that's a common inflammatory signal that your body is going to release in response to physical and mental stress. These glial cells begin to fire rapidly, and they begin to produce a lot of almost neural, if you could think of this in a way of like crossfire, or the way that I've heard it described before is like a bunch of crazy chihuahuas with machine guns all of a sudden going like this all over the place when those glial cells get inflammation hitting them. So shutting down inflammation and also controlling the amount of inflammation that those glial cells are exposed to is very important. So some of the things that can be biggies when it comes to neural inflammation particularly. One would be the presence of inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids and anything that is rancid or oxidized. Okay, so the 2 biggest things that if you were going to go out and enhance brain health from a dietary standpoint, from an omission standpoint, right off the bat, it would be heated vegetable oils. Okay, so that includes canola oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, friggin' PF Chang's, the healthy stir-fry joint down the street, all that stuff out. Most restaurants also cook most of their stuff in vegetable oil. So you need to be that person that's pretty much walking into a restaurant and either asking if they're cooking their stuff in like real butter, real olive oil, coconut oil, stuff like that. And if they're not, you're ordering something cold off the menu, like a cold salad with extra virgin olive oil. And you're just staying away from anything heated, period. A lot of the sauces, the dressings, etc., that they'll put on your steak, they'll put on your salads, they'll put on their starches like their rices or their roasted carrots and vegetables. Like, you would be surprised at how easy it is to take something that appears healthy on a menu and make it unhealthy with the addition specifically of heated vegetable oils. Okay, so the oils that are staples in your life are coconut oil, extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, macadamia nut oil, and then ghee is okay. That's like a clarified form of butter. And then just like regular grass-fed butter is okay. MCT oil is another one that's popping up nowadays, is a pretty common one. That's another one that's okay. Okay, but the vegetable oils are out. And then the other thing from an inflammatory standpoint that specifically can cause inflammation in these glial cells is glucose. So anything that causes a rise in blood glucose can oxidize cholesterol.
Yeah.
It can lead to what are called advanced glycation end products, which not only inflame brain tissue, but also age neural tissue.
Exactly.
Okay?
Yeah.
So I am totally not a guy who says, like, eliminate all sugars. Like, I do dark chocolate, I do red wine, I do rice, I do potatoes, and all that stuff. But the biggest things that you got to be careful with, number one would be spiking blood sugar while you're in a sedentary state.
Yeah.
Okay, so my strategy is I only have carbohydrates when I'm in a very insulin-sensitive state. So
which is after a workout, right? Typically?
Yeah, when you consume carbohydrates, your pancreas releases insulin, which is designed to shove that carbohydrate into muscle tissue. But if you're sedentary, a lot of times your muscle tissue doesn't need that carbohydrate, so it will get shoved into fat cells, or it'll get converted into triglycerides in the liver. But you can also suck up glucose and glycogen and stuff like that, or you can suck up glucose to form glycogen in muscle tissue.
And glycogen is just like the kind of stack of sugar essentially in the cell. You know
exactly.
What I'm saying? It's like a storage unit for sugar. Right?
So there are non-insulin mediated glucose uptake pathways, meaning that you can, when you consume carbohydrate, shove it into muscle rather than getting it converted into fat or into things that would inflame the brain without even getting much of a release of insulin by your pancreas. And all of those pathways are dependent upon your muscle having been exposed to resistance or high-intensity exercise.
Yeah.
So what I do is I have specific days of the week on which I do either hard weightlifting or high-intensity cardio intervals, and I'll alternate which days I do which. So like Monday might be weightlifting, Tuesday cardio, Wednesday weightlifting, Thursday cardio, etc. And I'll do that sometime between 4 and 6 p.m. in the afternoon, and then I have all my carbohydrates with dinner. So that they're not producing inflammation. So like, last night I had some chocolate, I had a little bit of wine, I had a little bit of potato with the what did we have? What kind of meat? I don't remember. It was like it was prime rib from Sunday. So it was like leftover prime rib that we reheated in butter on the stove. But I had potatoes along with that. Yeah. But either way, things that would normally really be bad news bears, middle of the day, lunchtime, etc. Fine post-exercise. So vegetable oils and fluctuations in blood sugar you want to avoid.
Which
is, now, what do you want to include?
I think one of the
go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the misconceptions is that we need to have this massive carbohydrate-rich breakfast. The kind of classic is the bread with the jam or the cereal, or whatever, and you're setting yourself up for major problems for the rest of the day. Would you agree?
Kind of. There's 2 times of day when your body is going to be most able to handle carbohydrates, when it's going to be in its most insulin-sensitive state. One is actually in the morning.
Right.
And then 2 is post-workout.
Right.
Now, I would rather choose the best of those 2 states, which is post-workout. Now, if you don't work out or you don't have time to work out, then if you're going to include carbohydrates, the time of day to include carbohydrates actually is going to be in the morning with breakfast.
Right.
But an even better scenario is to just save them all until after your workout later on in the day.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So, This is great as far as this bucket. Are there any other factors that are inducing inflammation inside of the body, inside of the brain?
Yeah, certainly. So non-nutrient-based pathways, one would be affecting the actual electrochemical gradient of the cells that fire. So your cells are designed to operate at an electrical chemical gradient of, a gradient of about 70 millivolts.
Yep.
Okay. So 70 millivolts for your sodium-potassium pathways and for everything that's running across that cell membrane to actually operate effectively.
Right.
So if we drop that to, say, 30 millivolts by introducing, say, like a positive electrical charge, then we're going to shut down the ability of that cell membrane to operate efficiently.
Right.
Now, if you do something like go outside, get exposed to sea air, mountain air, all of these what are called negative ions, what that does is that actually maintains a really nice electrochemical gradient. And then the things that actually produce positively charged ions are electricity from Wi-Fi routers, cell phones, computers, electrical appliances in your home, microwaves, airline travel, x-rays. All of that stuff is primarily positive ion driven.
Right.
So I don't expect you to live life in a bubble, but the more that you can do to mitigate the exposure, the better. So, for example, we're recording right now. My computer is hardwired into my into my router, so the actual Wi-Fi signal is off.
Right.
My laptop is actually grounded as well, which limits the amount of positive ions I'm getting off of the laptop. And that's just, you can go to a website like lessemf.com and you can buy a $6 grounding cable for something like a laptop.
Right.
This headset right here is not a wired headset. Sound is traveling through air tubes in this headset that I'm wearing right now.
Right.
Okay, so I'm not getting that wired up by my ear. Same thing when I talk on my cell phone. I use an air tube headset.
Right.
Cell phone is off right now. I use what's called a negative ion generator, which can mitigate some of the effects. So between me and the Wi-Fi router, which even though the radio signal is turned off, still produces positive ions, I have this. And you can get like Himalayan rock salt lamps. This is just minerals inside of this container. This one's called a harmonizer. There are different ways that you can do this. There are even like HEPA air filters that you can get with negative ion generators built in that clean the air, but that also release these negative ions. So essentially what you're trying to do is maintain proper electrochemical gradients by being aware of the electricity in your surrounding and then mitigating that. Sleeping is also a time that you can do this. So you may be familiar with like the concept of grounding or earthing.
Yes.
That's a really good way to do things. Some of those mats, those grounding or earthing mats, they do plug into the grounded outlet in your home.
Right.
And like in the U.S., electricity travels back to the substation through the ground.
Right.
So if we're sleeping on a grounding mat, for example, we're still getting exposed to surges and electrical pollution unless you have some kind of a dirty electricity filter installed in your home. So you can get like, there's a company called Greenwave. Let me duck down here for a second.
That's great.
Oh, I guess I can't unplug that one because that's what my laptop is plugged into. But in the wall behind me, I've got this little Greenwave dirty electricity filter. Yeah, I don't remember if that's what it, something like that. Yeah, Greenwave. But I've got 8 of them in the house, just in the main outlets in the house where we plug major things into or that run electricity a lot. And then there are even like fancier ways to expose your body to negative ions while you're asleep. So, for example, I use something called a biomat, and it's a $1,700 mat that you can go out and buy and sleep on, and they've got a payment plan where you can pay like $170 a month. But that was one of the best investments I ever made in my sleep. Frankly, you have one?
Yeah,
they're pretty
slept
cool.
on it for a while, and then my wife, because she would try to come over and snuggle with me, and I'd be like. She's like, could you please?
I ran into the same problem. I don't freaking get laid when I'm on my biomat. So
exactly.
So I take naps on it.
Yeah.
So I sleep after lunch on my biomat, and sometimes my kids and I will curl up on it and read a book.
Yeah.
But I don't sleep on it at night because of that issue with my wife. So
and just to clarify, one of the things that we had talked about earlier was grounding, and grounding is the concept that the earth emits is one of the best antioxidants that you can be exposed to, and that it emits negative ions into your body. So because we're being exposed to all these positive ions, and really all an antioxidant is a negative ion donor, right? It's like the earth is acting essentially like a very high-powered antioxidant. So
that's exactly what it's doing. That's why if you have the option to work out after a long day of working on the computer, one of your best bets is to go like climb trees and climb rocks outside.
So there is
or do something, or do like sprints in your bare feet, like on a golf course, like absolutely. And that's a great segue too when you're talking about donation of free radicals and antioxidants. When we're talking about inflammation, is anti-inflammatory compounds you can get from food. Right. So, for example, if I'm low on sleep, or if I've been traveling, or if I've been exposed to a lot of these inflammatory stressors that we just talked about, I start off every day with about 1 gram of curcumin. Okay, curcumin is a very potent anti-inflammatory, specifically for neural tissue. So, typically, curcumin in either a liquid curcumin form, like a sublingual liquid, Or there are forms of curcumin. There's what's called a phytosomal delivery, a curcumin-based phytosome. Those are two very good supplemental ways to get curcumin that are more potent than, say, eating Indian food or putting turmeric on your food.
Right.
So curcumin is a very good brain anti-inflammatory.
Right.
Another really, really good one are any sulfur-based antioxidants, and that would include cruciferous vegetables, onions, garlic, broccoli, cauliflower, stuff like that. Or if you really wanted to spend a little bit more money and use sulfur-based antioxidant supplements, glutathione is a really good one.
Yeah.
And whey protein has some glutathione in it, but you can also get like glutathione extract, like a liposomal glutathione that you can use in your mouth. It does not taste good.
No.
Tastes like liquid.
I had some last
parts,
night. It tastes like
it's, yeah. And
nasty.
another really, really good sulfur-based antioxidant is N-acetylcysteine.
Yeah.
Either of those you can get in supplement form. Those are really good. I personally am a fan of curcumin. You could use all that stuff, but so I use curcumin, and then I just have broccoli and cauliflower and onions and garlic and stuff like that around a lot.
Right.
Especially if I'm traveling, you've been exposed to a lot of these inflammatory triggers.
Don't even be breathing on anybody.
There are a lot of other like anti-inflammatory steps that you can take.
Yeah.
Those are some of the big wins, though. In knowing that we could probably talk all day about this stuff, but as far as like big practical wins, stay away from vegetable oils, stay away from sugar, be careful with electromagnetic exposure, use the earth and the ground in a therapeutic way, use curcumin, and then use sulfur-based antioxidants, and those are going to be some huge wins for you in that inflammation bucket.
That's fantastic, Ben. Thank you so much for that. And that's one of the buckets we talked about, neurotransmitters as well, and the HPA axis. I think the keys that you just talked about for inflammation are essential. And just from my perspective, at least, I think that inflammation is really what underlies a lot of the diseases and disorders of the 21st century. So what Ben is giving us here isn't just some great brain hack information to upregulate and upgrade your brain performance, but it's also information that will also help to prevent and perhaps even reverse disease processes within your body. So this is cutting edge information.
Yeah, I mean, consider this, like when it comes to your waistline, because if you can be smart and sexy, that's a good 1-2 combo. Fat cell apoptosis, fat cell death, or fat cell conversion into things like muscle cells, bone cells, or nerve cells cannot occur, period, in the presence of inflammation, okay? It simply cannot occur. So if you're able to shut down inflammation and then in conjunction with that, increase physical activity, not overeat calories, expose yourself to things like cold and heat temperature fluctuations, all that stuff will induce fat cell death. And so this anti-inflammation has some big downstream effects from a full body standpoint as well.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Neurotransmitters. So the neurotransmitter bucket.
Yeah.
Basically, neurotransmitters, just as a quick overview, are going to be the signaling molecules that your brain uses to talk to your body, that your brain uses to generate chemical signals to, do everything from generate thoughts, words, patterns, everything. So neurotransmitters, if you have neurotransmitter deficiencies, it typically manifests in brain fog, depression, insomnia, moodiness, anger, like a lot of these things that we would tend to associate with mood and psychology. A lot of that stuff is physiologically driven by either neurotransmitter deficiencies or neurotransmitter imbalances.
Right.
Now, you could, if you wanted to, go out and do some kind of a fancy, what's called like a neuroendocrine panel or a urinary neurotransmitter test to look at what your specific levels of neurotransmitters are.
Right.
Most people don't need to do that. Most people instead need to go for the big wins when it comes to neurotransmitters instead of like the finely tuned stuff, which I find rarely helps out people unless they're a complete head scratcher case. Now, in terms of the things that tend to be the biggest issues when it comes to neurotransmitters, number one, Amino acid deficiencies. Okay, this is a much bigger issue in people who are eating a primarily plant-based diet compared to people who are eating very complete sources of protein. I'm not saying that you can't eat a complete source of protein when you're on a vegan or a vegetarian-based diet. It's just much more difficult to do.
Yeah,
okay, you got to have really good combinations of seeds and grains, nuts, things like that.
Yeah, and I was just going to say there, Ben, that in all of the hundreds of micronutrient deficiencies tests that I've done on people that are strictly vegans, the amino acid profiling within their body is completely depleted. And unfortunately, a lot of the symptoms that are associated with living that kind of a lifestyle, is directly related to the lack of amino acid consumption. So I'm excited about where this is going.
Yeah, exactly. The mean person who throws raw tomatoes at the person wearing the fur coat, right? that kind of vegan scenario.
Exactly.
But yeah, and then of course the issue also is that once your cholesterol drops below about 200, you tend to get some IQ deficits, and that's why I'm really careful to keep my triglycerides really low, but my HDL and my LDL really high, which is really good as long as you're not inflamed. So high cholesterol out of inflammation and sugar is bad news bears, but high cholesterol in a clean body is great for your IQ. But that's a total segue. Amino acids and neurotransmitters. Some of the best things that you can do. Small, 20 to 30 grams of protein spread throughout the day. That's much better than one big bolus of protein, like a big steak at dinner or something like that. So, like, I'll start my day with a kale shake that has some good healthy fats in it, like some almonds and some walnuts, which are chock full of really good omega-3 fatty acids for the brain. I typically have a little bit of cilantro in there as a little bit of a cleanse for the liver. I've got some MCT oil in there, which is a really readily available source of fat for energy that keeps my appetite satiated for hours. But then one of the things that I put in there, of course, is a protein. Most of the time I'll use a whey protein. Sometimes I'll use a mix of pea and rice, so more of a vegetable-based protein. But I start off with those amino acids, and then, again, with lunch, I've always got either more seeds and nuts, a little bit of fish, some avocados, a wide variety of vegetables, and again, I'm getting a little bit of amino acids with lunch as well. Typically pre or post workout, I've got another 20 grams or so of protein, typically mixed with a little bit of coconut oil, sometimes some coconut water, but usually I'm going with that versus like a Gatorade or some amino acid deficient type of sports supplement. Post-workout, I'll even go out of my way, and I just since it's sitting right here in front of me, I don't want to use this as an advertisement, so I don't even show the label. But these are like amino acid capsules, okay? So I'll take some essential amino acid capsules and just toss back a handful of those just to make sure I keep my amino acid levels topped off. And I've had clients, especially athletes who I've worked with, who have dealt with insomnia, where the only thing that we've done is started them into using a little bit of supplemental essential amino acids. And you can get them in powder form, you can get them in capsule form, you can add them to water, you can use them during a workout, pre-workout, post-workout. But if you're deficient in neurotransmitters, or I'm sorry, deficient in amino acids, remember, they aren't just used for muscles. We're not just talking about you putting yourself at risk of lean muscle cannibalization or something like that. They're used for neurotransmitters, and you can be, as muscular as all get out, but if you don't have enough amino acids on board, you may still not have those neurotransmitter precursors that you want. So good sources of protein are really good, and getting essential amino acids into your body is a really good move when it comes to neurotransmitters. So number one would be amino acids, and number two would be a wide variety of good bacteria put into your digestive tract, because your bacteria. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just before you get into that, out of curiosity, just probably, I'm sure there's other people that maybe wondering this, but after you work out, are you consuming hemp protein, pea protein? Are you consuming whey protein? And if so, what kind of whey protein or what kind of protein would you recommend?
So the biggest factor is that you have an intake of all your essential amino acids necessary for neurotransmitter formation by the end of the day.
Right.
Okay, so protein combining in an acute fashion is not necessary unless we're talking about a bodybuilder who's been in the gym for 2 or 3 hours and just needs that super absorbable hit of like a whey protein isolate, for example.
Right.
Super biologically available, quick absorption, not mixed with, for example, casein. Like you can get whey casein blends that are a slower absorption of protein,
Right.
maybe a little bit more appropriate for taking before you go to bed at night,
Right.
but not quite as quickly absorbed post-workout.
Right.
In my case, because I work out in the afternoon, and I finish my workout around 6 p.m., when your natural protein synthesis and protein uptake is going to be highest, I simply finish my workout and have dinner within 30 to 60 minutes. And dinner always has something like wild-caught fish or some grass-fed beef. Occasionally, it'll be a mix of like quinoa with some seeds and nuts and cheeses. So usually for me, it is whatever I'm getting with dinner.
Right.
Now, when I was a bodybuilder, and I weigh 175 pounds right now, I was 215 pounds and 3% body fat when I was a bodybuilder. And without a doubt, I can tell you the number one thing to dump into your body post-workout if the goal is muscle gain is a whey protein isolate.
Right.
When we're talking about just simple neurotransmitters, it's basically just getting a good, wide, full spectrum of amino acids throughout the course of the day.
Good.
So
fantastic. Oh, this is great for brain function. If you're interested in bodybuilding, you've got a good strategy as well.
There you go.
That's great.
And then the bacteria in your digestive tract are responsible for producing a great deal of your neurotransmitters, especially one really, really important one that a lot of folks are deficient in, and that would be serotonin.
Yeah.
So the idea here is that the wider variety of good bacteria that you can expose yourself to, the better. Kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha, kefir, all of these are examples of fermented foods. Now, the important thing is that a lot of the like jars of sauerkraut or pickles or things like that that you might purchase at the average grocery store, those have been pasteurized or heat treated, and so much of the good bacteria in them are dead. Right. So it's better to go to a fancy grocery store like Whole Foods, for example, and spend the money on the good fermented stuff, or even just make it yourself. You know, kimchi is very easy to make. There's a free video on YouTube. My wife has a 90-minute class on how to make your own kimchi. If you were to do a search for Jessa Greenfield kimchi, you'd find it. But she makes kimchi and sauerkraut. We do a lot of fermented foods. You can, if you don't have the time to do this, you can simply use probiotics. Right. So you can take probiotics. You can you can even do something like eat yogurt and switch your yogurt brands every month or so. So you're getting exposed to a few different strains of good bacteria from different brands of yogurt. You can switch up probiotic brands that you're using every once in a while. Right. But basically really taking care of your good gut bacteria while at the same time limiting the overgrowth of bad or opportunistic bacteria. So for example, one of the things that I use quite a bit of is oil of oregano. And oil of oregano is really good at knocking out a lot of bacterial overgrowth, the type of bacteria that's going to outcrowd the good bacteria in your stomach. So, for example, when I'm traveling, I do about 10 to 15 drops of oil of oregano into a glass of water about 3 times a day. So it's really good for enhancing your immune function, but it's also good at kind of controlling bad bacteria overgrowth in your GI tract. Lots of fermented foods. When I travel, I don't get fermented foods. When I travel with a probiotic. Yeah. There are some probiotics that don't need to be refrigerated, which is good for if you're traveling. So... some of them do need to be refrigerated, so make sure you know.
One of the things I'd say, Ben, I think this is such a brilliant conversation, and really this is the future of how, healthcare is going to be delivered in like 10, 20 years in, I think, medical practices. Because if you look at Scientific American came out last summer with this magazine article entitled, Microbes outnumber your own human cells 10 to 1, and it starts talking about the microbiome, which is the ecology of and the relationship that the bacteria has within our body. And this is a lot of people, they don't know that in order to sleep better, they need to have healthy levels of neurotransmitters that are also related to the healthy level of gut flora and bacteria colonies in their gut. Like, this is all new science, and I think that this is powerful to understand in the area of performance, because if you want to get out of brain fog, if you want to increase your ability to remember things, if you want to increase your ability to feel rejuvenated after a sleep because neurotransmitter levels are at a healthier state, I've personally, seen unbelievable transformations with people that have brought into their bodies the healthy types of bacteria that just don't exist. And I think I was talking to you in an interview. I interviewed you just a little while ago, and another thing that you said that also has healthy bacteria is also some artisanal cheese. Is that right?
Yeah, cheese is a decent source of bacteria, like artisanal cheese, like hard European cheeses. Those are pretty good. They aren't quite as fermented as a lot of like yogurts, dairy products, yogurt, cheese, for example, things like that. But hard artisanal cheeses are okay. Not your biggest win, but they're okay.
Yeah.
The other thing to realize is that if you have taken antibiotics, if you use a lot of antibacterial hand soap in your office or at your gym, if you do a lot of showering and you're showering twice a day with soap and wiping all the good bacteria off of your body, like there is a certain downside to cleanliness when it comes to brain function, in that if you're constantly wiping yourself clean of bacteria, you're missing out on a lot of what bacteria can do for you when it comes to neurotransmitter production. Right. So I would say, don't walk around being, Stinky Pete or Pigpen all day long, but understand, like, I personally use a soap-based shower about once every 2 days. Right. And because I eat clean, I don't stink. Like, people don't complain about me. Right. Or at least they're very polite and they keep it to themselves, the fact that I do stink. Right. Either way, though, it's very important to not be overly cleanly, especially when it comes to a lot of these modern ways to kill bacteria. Right. Because when you kill bacteria, you kill the good stuff along with the bad stuff. So just be really careful with that. Right. So,
and if I've heard, this analogy, if you have a can, you start putting garbage in the can, that's when the flies will come. So, the way that you can spray the flies, you can kill the flies, but ultimately if the garbage is still in the can, the flies will eventually come back. So the goal is, like what you're saying, create like a healthy vessel, put good nutrients in the food, the flies won't come, the unhealthy toxic bacteria. I bet you people are like, oh, well, what are you supposed to do to protect yourself? It's all about, your own internal, ecology. Is that right?
Yeah, and I mean, if you do just naturally produce sweat that stinks, try a little bit of coconut oil. Yeah. That's what I use in my armpits. And if you don't like that greasy feeling, you can make your own deodorants very, very easily. A little bit of baking soda, a little bit of coconut oil, a little bit of peppermint extract, like super easy to do. Yeah. So slight segue there, but ultimately take care of your gut, get adequate amino acids, and then finally, before we move on to the HPA axis, understand that living a high-paced lifestyle, specifically with regards to loud music, cell phones, bright lights, lots of clubbing, scary movies, fast-paced video games, all of that stuff can rapidly turn over neurotransmitters. And don't get me wrong, like, I appreciate it. I played Laser Quest for 2 hours the other night, running all over that. We've got the biggest laser tag maze in the U.S. here in Spokane, Washington, and it's just like bright lights and fighting for 2 hours. But I won't lie to you. I know that depletes neurotransmitters much more quickly, and if I was doing that every day, I would probably have some issues with insomnia and mood and stuff like that. Right. But, if your staple is video gaming and clubbing, like, understand that stuff rapidly depletes neurotransmitters, and you got to be careful with that.
Oh yeah, that's great. This is such great information, and so really the two keys are amino acids and then creating a healthy microbial status within the body.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
Talk about the last bucket, the HPA axis. I know, there's a lot of hormone dysregulation, a lot of adrenal fatigue, a lot of brain fog, and I know it's also associated with this HPA axis. Tell us a little bit about it, and what are some good brain hacks to really upregulate brain function and performance in respect to HPA?
Sure. If you have hormone dysregulation, say low testosterone in guys or low progesterone in women, or a high estrogen or what's called high or estrogen dominance in women, or you have very, very high levels of cortisol in either sex, or high levels of another hormone called sex hormone binding globulin in either sex, or you have low levels of thyroid hormone or low levels of thyroid stimulating hormone. These are all issues that can significantly affect mental function and can cause issues like brain fog, moodiness, depression, lack of motivation, afternoon sleepiness, etc. So there's a big link between your hormones and your brain.
Yeah.
And the main things that are going to affect your hormones are going to be your pituitary gland, which is going to do things like secrete melatonin, for example, or I'm sorry, it's not going to secrete melatonin. Your pineal gland will secrete melatonin. Your pituitary gland is responsible for some other things. Your hypothalamus, which is going to help to send message to, for example, your thyroid gland to produce thyroid hormone, and then your adrenal glands, which are going to produce things like corticosteroids, like cortisol or epinephrine, for example. So if the link between these three systems is not set up properly, then what happens is you get hormonal dysregulation. And the two main things that can cause this type of hormonal dysregulation is, number one, inflammation, which you already talked about, and everyone is already a ninja when it comes to inflammation.
Exactly.
And number two is hypercortisolism, and that's typically from stress. Okay, so I personally...
You're saying that hypercortisolism, inflammation and hypercortisolism, which is probably one of the biggest things that people that are, quote unquote high performers, those executives, those entrepreneurs out there, that they deal with, that's what really damages HPA, the hypothalamic pituitary axis.
Yep, exactly. So the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is most affected by high levels of cortisol and high levels of inflammation. Okay, so as far as the cortisol is concerned, there are a few things that can really, really help with decreasing cortisol, and I'll tell you some of my favorites. So the first one is neurofeedback. Now, there is a device that you can purchase from the Heart Math Institute, and it's called the EM Wave. This is a device that attaches to your computer, and the other end of it attaches to your earlobe, and it will track your heart rate and also the variability in your heart rate rhythm, which is a direct way to quantify how much stress that you are under. And when you're using the actual software that accompanies this device, which you can use for 10 to 15 minutes a day, it trains you how to direct your thoughts, your breathing, your mood, to bring yourself into a more coherent state of heart rhythm. Now, I mentioned earlier in this call that the heart is almost like your second brain, and the heart actually produces an electrical field that's 60 times more powerful than the brain. So if you can optimize your heart rhythm, it's going to directly affect your brain and also directly affect this HPA axis by decreasing cortisol. Now, if you don't like to sit in front of a computer playing around with neurofeedback software, there's also an app that does this same thing called the Inner Balance app. So don't feel that you need to be tied down to neurofeedback for the rest of your life. When I tested for high levels of blood cortisol a couple of years ago, I started doing neurofeedback, and I used these devices for about 4 months. And then after that, all I do now is for 5 minutes every morning, right when I wake up, I test my heart rate variability. And if my heart rate variability is low, that indicates that I've got high levels of cortisol or high levels of stress. So what I can do is either A, ensure that I don't beat my body up with hard training that day, which is simply going to aggravate any other stress that's present in my lifestyle, or B, not get out of bed until I've done enough deep breathing and focus on positive thoughts, and I'll even do a little bit of journaling, as woo-woo as that sounds, to actually optimize my heart rate variability. And I've found that within 5 to 10 minutes, I can begin to bring it up. And yes, it does require you staying in bed, which I know can be really annoying to some high achievers, but just taking that little bit of time to not jump out of bed first thing in the morning to go check Facebook or your email, but to instead lay there for just a little bit and do that simple self-quantification in the morning, that can make a big difference in terms of both tracking your stress and your cortisol, and also learning what things that you do control that response.
Right.
So that type of self-quantification and neurofeedback is a big, big win in my book.
Wow.
Now, a couple of other things that I do. One is box breathing. So box breathing is a very simple breathing pattern that is a 4-count in, a 4-count hold, a 4-count exhale, and then a final 4-count hold. I'm teaching my children how to do this. I do it when I'm stressed out, and just a few times going through that breathing pattern, and I've quantified this using those heart rate variability methods that I just described to you. That's incredibly powerful because many of us will find ourselves hunched over email, on phone calls, engaged in shallow chest breathing.
Right.
There are baroreceptors in your chest, and those baroreceptors in your chest will sense that pressure and cause a cortisol release from your adrenal glands.
Right.
So if you can breathe deep, diaphragmatic, preferably nasal-based breathing, it's going to help you quite a bit with that hypercortisolism.
Oh,
so
that's fantastic.
That's another good one in addition to neurofeedback that can help quite a bit. There are a variety of other methods that you can use, but I'd like to give you one more, and that would be the use of adaptogenic herbs.
Yes.
Now, one of the simplest examples would be, for example, maca root, which is a kind of an earthy tasting powder that you could put into your morning smoothie or stir into a glass of water.
Yeah.
And an adaptogen will increase cortisol if cortisol is low and you need a little bit of a pick-me-up, but will also decrease cortisol if cortisol is high. Right. And the cool thing about many adaptogens is they also have some really good anti-inflammatory properties. Like some adaptogens like eleuthero, ashwagandha, rhodiola, cordyceps, all of these will help with oxygenation, breathing, anti-inflammation, but they'll also help with regulation of cortisol. I personally, every single day in the mid-morning, use an adaptogen. I also have an adaptogen in the multivitamin that I take before I go to bed at night. I'm a big fan of adaptogenic herbs, and I think that everyone, especially on stressful days, may want to consider using something like that in their protocol. So neurofeedback, breathing, and adaptogens would be 3 of the really good ways that I would recommend for controlling cortisol. There's about 20 more in my book, but those are some of the big wins that I rely upon on a daily basis.
Wow, that's fantastic. And obviously that upregulates the health of the HPA. I bet you just globally, hormonally, if your adrenals are fatigued and you're producing too much cortisol, it's affecting all these other hormone cascades in your body. So just by implementing those simple strategies you just talked about, you're going to be making a massive difference in your overall health. I love the box breathing. I think I'll begin using that, because I can almost feel while I'm in emails and then I've got a phone call or something else that needs to take place, or a project that's due. I can feel my heart rate increasing in a way.
Yeah, so, and that's a Navy SEAL tactic, actually, that they'll use. Another time I'll use box breathing is I do a lot of heat acclimation. I'll stick myself in a sauna until my eyeballs are about to pop out of my head to heat acclimate myself, because I go and do like Ironman triathlons in Hawaii and Thailand and Israel and some of these places where you just feel like you're in a stove by the time you're out there on the bike for 100 miles. So I'll go sit in the sauna, and it will get extremely uncomfortably hot and stressful, and I'll just start to do this box breathing, and it just takes me kind of to this different place. You can use it during periods of intense physical stress as well.
Now, Ben, these are all amazing brain hacks. I love the information you've given, the 3 buckets, the inflammation, neurotransmitters, HPA, some real practical strategies. I've wondered, though, what the best. One of the things that you wrote down in your book was a few really great hacks to get into flow, which is, to get into the zone. If you want to get a project done, if you want to, get your brain just completely laser beam focused on something, get it done in a jiffy. What are some of those like really amazing strategies, those biohacks, brain hacks that you have for us that could benefit our ability to get into that zone?
Sure. So a couple of the big ones. One would be there are apps and there are free MP3 and also paid MP3 downloads that you can find that will play what are called binaural beats. And what that means is, for example, when you produce alpha brainwaves, that's one of the brainwave patterns that is associated with being in this state of flow or being in the zone. Even though, for example, if you read Stephen Kotler's book, Rise of Superman, there are some other brainwaves that kind of take over, like these theta brainwaves, once you get deep into the zone. Yeah. As you're first entering the zone, you get this alpha brainwave production, and it's generally about 8 to 12 hertz in terms of the brainwave frequency. So if, for example, I were to play 390 hertz in my left ear and 400 hertz in my right ear, the difference between those two is 10 hertz. Okay, so I'm initiating a 10 hertz alpha brainwave production by using what are called binaural beats. Okay, so binaural beats can be used prior to getting on stage, prior to a big workout, prior to anything where you need to hack brain performance to get yourself into the zone more quickly. That would be one. The breathing techniques that I talked about would be another, but specifically the type of breathing technique that you'd want to use if we're talking about performance would be nasal breathing. When you get that flow of air through your turbinates and you get the enhanced oxygenation and humidification of that air before it reaches your lungs, that will shut down some of that cortisol production. But when you look at studies that have been done, and there's a guy named John Douillard in Boulder, Colorado at the LifeSpa clinic there who has done electrical EEG patterns of the brain and looked at breathing patterns that are associated with that increased alpha brainwave activity, and it's deep nasal breathing that can actually allow you to hack your way into that zone. So what I've trained myself to do is when I'm out on a run, on a bike ride, doing a weight training session, I will focus on tempo and I will focus on nasal breathing and essentially try to turn exercise into this deep meditative state where, based off of that rhythmic nasal breathing, I'm getting that alpha brainwave production. When I first started off doing this, I had to use the breathe right strips because I wasn't used to oxygenating myself through my nasal cavities. I eventually was able to wean myself off of those, but anything physically stressful that you do, or anything really psychologically or mentally stressful, if you can tap into that power of deep nasal breathing, that will help you out quite a bit as well. So that'd be another tactic that you could use. So you could use your ears and you could use your nose, and those would be two ways to do it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Those are some really great strategies, obviously, to get into the zone, to help us get into flow state. And I just want to thank you so much, Ben, for getting on this call, for delivering the value that you have. Is there any other just random brain hacks that come to mind, or do you feel like we've covered pretty much the top wins in your books?
I'm going to give you a 500-page brain hack. Go to beyondtrainingbook.com and you can get all sorts of brain hacks in there. So
that's great.
I think probably with what you've just learned in the past hour, you've got some stuff to work with if you're watching this. So if you have more questions, stuff like that, I'm sure Isaac can point you in the right direction as far as some of the other resources that I have out there. So. And
just out of curiosity, I know that the U.S. food pyramid has carbohydrates at the bottom and, fats closer to the top. You look at Walter Willett, the nutrition department head at Harvard's food pyramid, he's got poly and monounsaturated fats at the bottom, etc. What would your food pyramid, what would your ideal plate perhaps look like as far as percentages of fats, of proteins, and of carbohydrates or vegetables be?
Sure. I actually have a food pyramid that I've created. It's called the Superhuman Food Pyramid. It's at superhumancoach.com. And it is like Walter Willett's pyramid, consisting of fats at the bottom, and then vegetables above that, and then proteins above that, fruits above that, grains above that, and sweets at the top, along with a variety of both fermented as well as natural drinks kind of alongside of that. But as far as macronutrient ratios, if we look at what most, let's say, Northern Europeans or folks who came from a Northern European ancestry, France, Italy, England, Norwegian countries, places like that, we generally tend to thrive best when it comes to blood sugar control, shutting down inflammation, pretty good macronutrient ratio at about 50 to 60% fat, 20 to 30% protein, and then depending on the level of physical activity for that particular day, anywhere from 10 to 30% carbohydrate.
Oh, wow. That's perfect. I completely agree with that. I mean, that's amazing. So we can learn we can learn a lot more about what you're doing at what websites. Obviously, you said beyondtrainingbook.com, correct?
Yeah, and then I blog and I podcast every week and put out a bunch of other nerdy information over at bengreenfieldfitness.com.
I love it. I'm really excited about what transformations will come out of this content and information delivered to our listeners. Thank you so much, Ben. You can actually get the transcripts of this, if you want to invest into learning a little bit more about, how we can kind of package everything together. There's a lot of other great speakers in the summit. Definitely share this with anybody else that you feel would benefit from this information. This is life-saving information. We're just so excited that you're here, Ben, with us. And thank you so much for investing the time to really benefit the people that were listening today.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. And now I can go put on my pants.